Please join me in welcoming what I affectionately call Bernie the Force.
You know, I'd asked them to do dramatically less hype. I strive in a low expectation environment. All right, so after Max's presentation, we're going to view this slide as the good old days, right? So this is a simpler time. But really want to take you on a little bit of a journey around how information flowed. Obviously, as humans, we have this yearning for information, which is why many of us, even in conferences and meetings, on conference calls, we have to have our phone in front of us because there could be a Donald Trump tweet that we miss before anybody else. And so this yearning for information started a long time ago. And then it was how do you communicate that information became a little bit more primitive. And then, of course, technology advanced and you could print it and distribute it easier. And then, of course, there was ledgers, which allowed it to happen even faster. And then, boom, see, look, we moved right from the Stone Age to the 50s pretty quickly. And then, of course, computers came out. And what was this idea of what you could do with computers in terms of passing information along? And then the birth of the internet. The idea that professors at MIT and other places said, what could go wrong if we connect all these computers around the world so we can communicate with each other? And today, of course, this information is ubiquitous. We can literally find out anything. Last night we had a conversation, very deep philosophical conversations, I'm sure like the ones that happened at MIT, in which somebody asked how many calories were in a Guinness. And of course we asked Dr. Google and he told us it was 125. So information is out there in a way that's never happened. But of course, all that information has, like Max just talked about, made it very rich for hackers to change it. So is it really 125 calories for Guinness, or is that fake news out there propagated by Guinness making you think that it's not so bad? You don't know, right? So the question becomes, how do you live in an information-yearning world when all this information is so threatened by cyber attacks and without knowing where information is really valid or not? So, of course, there's a temptation to take your data and treat it like Fort Knox, where you put it in a building, a secure server, and you do everything you can not to have anybody touch it. So you can put your data in a bubble. And to some extent, especially in the areas of government, that's exactly what they do. They put them in very, very siloed areas. So then enters blockchain. And let me just start here by just saying that to people in different audiences, blockchain means different things to different people. If you go to Martha's Vineyard this summer and you wear a Make America Great hat, it may not mean the same as it means somewhere else. You may not make it down Main Street in Martha's Vineyard with that hat on. Blockchain has that same kind of stigma because there was this insane amount of hype around this technology. But fundamentally, whether we call it blockchain or something else, the idea is how do you close this trust gap? And of course, everybody's very familiar with this slide. Merkle. I joked earlier that Merkle trees are not in bloom in Austin this time of year. Then somebody corrected me and said that wasn't true. Because that's like Max, he teaches at MIT. I've driven by MIT, so that's where we have a lot in common. So here's the timeline that we look at from a blockchain perspective. You have this 10, 12, 13-year cycle in which it's been out there, enormous hype, cryptocurrency, which ignited this libertarian, we don't need government movement. And now, of course, the business people are looking at it saying, what can we do with it? And I think the good news is we're now ready to be thinking about blockchain from an applications perspective. So forget the hype, forget currency. What are the things that you can actually do with this technology? But again, there's still this question of what is it? And like I just talked about, you got cryptocurrency. But it's not just about cryptocurrency. And we think of blockchain as an underlying technology, as an enabling technology for some of the things that we can build applications on. It still requires a lot of explanation. So what we've done at Ownum and what we're working on to do in Cleveland is creating an ecosystem where blockchain applications flourish. And of course, here's the challenge, right? This is a very popular model at my Mercedes dealership, 1 horsepower car. But how do you take existing technologies and add new technologies on top of that. Because one of the issues for most business people is when you go to conferences like this and you hear about all this incredible stuff that's coming in the future, you still have the practicality of operating your business today. And so what we've looked at is changing kind of the nomenclature to what we call a belted system. Again, because the idea that blockchain means something different. So what we call it is a blockchain encrypted ledger that's executable and distributed. So if you think and say, okay, so by the way, not everything needs to be on the system like this, which is a very important distinction between the hype. So does your ledger need to be executable? Does it need to be encrypted? And does it have to be distributed? If the answer to any of those questions is no, then what you're doing right now with the single-use database is probably the correct solution. If those things are true, this is just a way to kind of visualize what you can do with the system. So encrypted, we obviously understand the public-private key and being able to control access to specific data, very important. The idea that it's executable, the idea that the ledger self-executes commands that you can build on to that. I think Arun talked about yesterday in the auditing world, the idea that you can audit the code so that you know that the code's executing properly. And then the idea that it's distributed. Do you need multiple parties to be part of this transaction? And if the answer, again, to all those is yes, then this is probably the right solution. So how to interact with the belted systems. You have your web portal, you have your API connectors, you have your direct invocation of blockchain, you host your own node, and then, of course, you build your own network. So these are all the pieces and parts. And if you notice, blockchain's only one of those components. Because I think some of the mistake that's made when people talk about blockchain is they look at it and say, we built a blockchain system. There's really no such thing. Blockchain's an ingredient in a system that has a lot of other technologies already in it. So we at Ownum talk about the idea of government and innovation, which is typically a little oxymoronic comment, right? But if you think about it, and especially just off the heels of what Max just talked about, right? Self-guiding spaceships and all kinds of crazy things that can happen in the future. Think about that world, and think about the world that exists today in government. If you were to fly from here to Mexico, you need to have a passport. So if we said, hey, let's go grab a trip down there, we'll go to Tijuana and have some food or whatever we're going to do down there, you'd have to bring this little piece of paper book with you. Does that strike you as odd in the sense that we're sitting here in 2019 and that you have to have a paper booklet that validates that you're an American citizen, right? So think about the forgery possibilities there and the limitations of making something like that happen. So I'll give you an example of something simplistic that we're doing because we at Ownum also think that the easiest technology to roll out is the simplest problems that you can solve. So if I asked you in this room, do you know where your children are? You'd probably all say yes. If I asked you, do you know where your car title is? You'd say, I really just don't care. Because if you, either it's at the bank, it's at the leasing company, it's in a drawer somewhere, and when I go to trade it in, you really don't think about it, and if you find it, you find it. If you don't, you don't. The reality is that a simple piece of paper like that, the idea that you have the state of wherever you live, or in Max's case, Massachusetts, has this piece of paper that says he owns this car, that document costs the ecosystem an enormous amount of money. Let me illustrate real quickly. So it's all paper-based. We've been to banks where they have 900,000 physical pieces of paper for each one of the loans that they have out there. And that's a smaller bank. So what's the cost to the ecosystem to have 900,000 pieces of paper that you track? And as the banker that we met with joked, sometimes maybe they grab the wrong piece of paper when that loan's paid off and send the wrong title to the wrong client. Of course, human error. That's with 900,000 pieces of paper, you think it's probably more than one. They get 3,000 phone calls a day asking where their car title is when they've paid off their loan. It's incredibly cumbersome to the entire ecosystem. To the car companies, I visited Mercedes where they print the certificate of origins, which is the title that comes in. They literally have a giant room with 4 printers. They print these pieces of paper. They sort them by which dealer is going to get them every day. Then if they say, okay, Mercedes-Benz of Roslyn is getting their certificate of origins, they've got 7 cars. They then have to look at a piece of paper and go, does Roslyn get them by regular mail or FedEx? If they get them by regular mail, they fold them, put them in an envelope, and mail them. They get them by FedEx, they send them by FedEx. Again, how often do things go wrong in that area? It's crazy. For a dealership, if you can be in a cash flow situation where you sell a lot of cars and yet you've lost an enormous amount of cash because you don't have the titles to those trade-ins, so you can't monetize that trade. For the buyer, being able to have your boarding pass on your phone is pretty convenient. That's how all of us will get on a plane later today or tomorrow. Wouldn't it be nice to have your car title on your phone? So if somebody wants to transfer it, you can hit a button, it sends it to that person, the person sends you the money, sales tax is paid, registration fees are paid. That's the vision of how we look at that. On the insurance side, when the last hurricane hit Florida, I have a home in Key Largo, and actually, thank God, because I hated this little car. This little smart car I had was parked in a parking lot that got submerged. I was like, yes. And it took 90 days for that insurance claim to pay because the insurance company has to get the title from the leasing company. Leasing company has to send it to them. They then have to put the title in their name. They then have to find a salvage yard, transfer the title to them, and then once you have the title in that name, then they can release the car. That can take 60, 70, 80 days to make that happen. Why isn't that? And again, in a world where we just saw this presentation about computers could possibly replace humans, we're still sitting in a world where it takes 90 days to transfer a piece of paper from one individual to another. Again, car dealerships, we've talked to car dealerships, Carvana Drive Time. They have 58 humans that they employ that all they do is transfer paper back and forth. Auto lenders, I talked about the banks examples, 900,000 documents. We talked to one bank that when they get their titles in, they just shred them. So the state issues a title, they take it in a shredder and just throw it away. So imagine that you say, hey, your son graduated from, probably not MIT, from a school. It says, what do you do? What does your son do for a living? He shreds titles at this bank. Oh, does that pay well? That's what they do because it's easier and simpler for them to shred the title than it is to store it. And the theory is when the client pays off the car, they'll just go apply for a duplicate, take that risk, and then mail it. Of course, as Julio talked about earlier yesterday, it's all about client experience. And is that the right client experience? Because when have you paid off your car? You've paid off your car at the point in time which you sold it. You don't want to wait 2 weeks to get that title because now there's this 2-week lag between getting that information. We talked about the insurance industry. This is probably one of their biggest issues. The other thing that happens is that little smart car that I sold could possibly end, or that got totaled or destroyed in that hurricane, could possibly end up as a low mileage used car somewhere in Utah because it goes through a system where 50 different states have 50 different title agencies, and all of a sudden somebody in Utah says, why does your car smell like mold? I don't know. It was a low mileage used car. I have no idea. Well, it was a salvage car from Florida, but there's no way for the systems to properly know that. Or if they do, they may not find out for years. That just recently happened in Ohio. They went out and pulled the database from old vehicles, and they got somewhere around 200,000 or 300,000 cars that were active vehicles on a road that were sold as perfectly new cars, but it turns out were salvaged. And then, of course, this one, the car company. And John McIntosh talked about this last night. He had a daughter who had a Honda Element, traded into a dealer. That dealer sold it to an individual. That individual sold it to somebody else, but the car's never been retitled. So that car's still in his daughter's name 2 years later, because that was a way for the person who bought the car from the dealer to avoid paying sales tax. The challenge is Honda's got a recall on that car. Well, they keep thinking his daughter's the one who's driving the car. So John says, yeah, I do get that phone call all the time. Yeah, because the dealer's getting a lot of pressure to fix the car. But if the title exists digitally, I can ping your phone and say, hey, your car's been recalled. Click here to see what the recall's about. Click here to schedule service. Those are some things that you can do with technology that make it a lot easier. And of course, private sales. You know, I used to own 20 car dealerships. I own 2 now, mostly because of presentations like Max's that I went to. I said, wow, I'm definitely the first one. I was below the water, and you're in LNG car dealerships, right? So if you look at private sales, they have to happen typically through a car dealership because there's no trust. Because if I'm sitting here in Texas and I want to sell somebody a car in California, I'm going to say to them, okay, well, send me the money, I'll send you the title. And that person's going to say, send me the title, I'll send you the money. And we have that conversation back and forth 10 times. I say, screw it. I go to a dealer, sell the car. They say, screw it. They go to a dealer and buy a car. So this system could make private transactions happen pretty quickly. So that's what we're doing. And I guess, in summary, the easiest message to all of you here is there's a lot of things in your own organizations. So rather than thinking about uses of blockchain per se and getting immediately triggered by blockchain. We had somebody that we met with that said that they put a little AI on their phone, and when anybody sent them the word blockchain, it translated it to bullshit. So rather than thinking that way about blockchain, think about what are some paper things that you can do. What are paper processes in your company? And go for the simplest possible use case and build from there. That's what we've done, what we think with car titles. There's a lot of other applications, but if you go to find simple solutions in the company, you'll find that there's easy ways for you to make this happen. And that's what we're doing with Champ Titles. We hope to roll out in about a half a dozen states later this year. And then we're kind of taking that same chassis and thinking about what are some other things that are complicated that, again, we don't think of. And it's really birth and death certificates. I've talked to the lieutenant governor about this quite a bit. In Ohio, it takes you about 6 months to die. So once you're dead, the state doesn't actually believe you're dead for like 6 months, right? Then they say 6 months later, okay, you're actually dead, right? And you think, well, other than being kind of a little funny, what is the ramifications of that? There's huge ramifications to that, transferring trust, transferring money, transferring assets. So again, if you can do that in a very quick and efficient manner using technology, it's a great use case. The other one is birth certificates. It's things we don't think about, but if any of us in our room, I asked you where your car title is, I guarantee you nobody in this room knows where your birth certificate is because you really don't care. But unfortunately, there are times when you need that, especially from 0 to 18. Right? So if you're going to enroll in kindergarten, like in Cleveland, we have a big initiative around universal preschool. And yet we only have like a 55% take rate. So it's free, and yet only about 55% of residents of Cleveland who are in poverty use the daycare system. And it's free. Well, why? Because you need to show your birth certificate that you live in Cleveland and that you're a certain age. But birth certificates are available from 10 to 4 downtown in City Hall. You have to pay a $35 fee to get it. Okay, well, that doesn't seem that big a deal to any of us in this room because if we want to leave work at 10 o'clock, we just do. And $35 doesn't seem like a lot of money. But if you're somebody who lives in poverty in inner city, getting there is a challenge, paying the $35 is a challenge, and getting out of work at 10 o'clock is a challenge. So they just don't do it. The concept of friction. The same reason why sometimes we go on a website and we want to buy something, and it starts asking us too many questions, we just close the browser and say, right? Same kind of inertia happens. So if you can make that birth certificate, again, available in your wallet like your boarding pass, and you can share only the information that you want with the person that you want it to share it with, it can be incredibly more efficient. The other one that came up is school records. So a single mom, couple kids in the inner city, gets evicted from her apartment, goes to a different apartment, crosses school districts. That kid can no longer go to the first school district, can't go to the second one either because the records haven't been transferred. So for 3 or 4 weeks while that happens, these kids are sitting at home alone, unsupervised. One event happens, that kid's life is forever changed. We can use technology to end those kinds of barriers and make it so that instantaneously all these records, boom, barcode, done, enrolled, next day. Simple. Those are the kinds of things that I think what we look at in Ohio and in Cleveland is transforming government to be more like Amazon than the actual Amazon, which is probably what it looks like today, right? The actual Amazon is very scary, annoying, hot, buggy. You're probably getting eaten by an alligator. It's not good. But the real Amazon online is much better. So how do we transform that? And so that's what we're looking at in our company. And our mission is to make government and business more efficient. We joke internally that we have a gene that says we want to make government better. None of us in our company would ever run for public office. That would be a very, very bad career choice for any of us who don't have a filter. So but if you look at our governments, we're all taxpayers. Every single one of us are taxpayers. If you take the government that we have today and you put it through Max's exercise, which say, what does it look like today and what does it look like in 20 years if nothing changes? There is no sustainable government that will exist. You cannot run government today and map it out 20 years from now because there just won't be enough money in the system to pay for the inefficiencies. Before this trip, we went down to Mexico to talk to them about some of our solutions. And when they described their mishmash of systems, it was absolutely incredible. They probably have 1,000x amount of resources that they need to solve the problems that they're solving. So they, rather than taking a holistic look and saying, what is it that we're trying to accomplish, they just put more and more and more humans at paper and inefficient processes, which is fine until the government runs out of money. So what we're looking at Ownum, what we're looking at is creating some simple solutions around how do we make government sustainable, how do we make government available for the future, so that in case machines don't take over, and that little, now that I think that's might be a possibility, right? In that scenario in which machines don't take over, we still have a government of humans that can actually function properly. That's the one area I think that we've seen that really hasn't innovated the way they should. And also on the business side, what are some things that we always just take for granted? Like we say, it just always happened this way. What are some cumbersome processes that we can overcome to make business more efficient now and reap those rewards? So that's what we're working on. We're really excited to have partnered with KPMG to make this happen. We looked at a lot of different consulting firms out there, and KPMG was head and shoulders advanced from everybody else in terms of actually doing practical applications rather than just talking about these things. So that's what we're doing. If I'm sure all of you in this room fantasize about coming to Cleveland in early December because it's the #1 tourist destination in early December. It's beautiful, right? Nice and cold, wintry. I can visit the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. If you want to get sick, we have the Cleveland Clinic. We have this amazing conference there in December, Blackland Solutions. So I encourage all of you to come. I think we've got a lot of really cool things to showcase in Ohio that we're doing. So thank you for having me. Thank you, Arun and KPMG, for partnering with us. And with that, if we have any questions, we'll do that.
Bernie, that was fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for making it real. I loved your practical examples, especially how government was working with citizens. Those were some real impactful examples. While the audience, we do have time for a couple of questions. While the audience is thinking about questions, there is one question that I wanted to ask. So what are government officials responding to most eagerly as it relates to blockchain? And what is causing the most skepticism?
Sure. Well, I'll answer the second one first. So on the skepticism part, it goes back to the wording, right? So they hear blockchain and whatever government, we all saw the Senate hearings with Facebook, right? So we know government's level of intel on technology. So what they'll do when they hear blockchain is they'll go, oh yeah, blockchain, blockchain. Then they take a break, Google blockchain, and see cryptocurrency, and go, we don't want currency. We don't understand what any of this is all about. So that's the skepticism. So that's why we had to change the nomenclature. In terms of what we've seen, especially in states like Ohio, Colorado, Utah, Arizona, is that there's a big yearning. If you're a politician, if you're elected official, you can talk about all these issues that polarize people, left or right, and make people crazy and clickbait and all that stuff. Or you can make a decision to talk about the things that everybody universally would agree on. Nobody's going to disagree that the government should be able to do more with less resources. Nobody's going to say, no, that's a really bad idea, that we can run a government for less money. So I think politicians we're seeing on both sides, Democrats and Republicans, are coming together around that, which I think is very positive.
Thank you so much. Any other questions for Bernie? Great.
Bernie, thanks. Roger Vijay from Nissan. This is by far the first practical application I saw of how we could leverage it in the business side. It almost resonates as document management system 3.0.
Yes.
Is that really where this is going to lie, or is there a future beyond that?
No, that's a great question. I'm glad you see it that way. So exactly right. So I think, like any other technology, I think and I think you saw that from Max's presentation. It starts in a simple way, right? So again, if you take the AI thing, I could beat somebody in chess. Great. Humans are in zoos looking at machines going, damn it, we screwed up. Right? So there's a spectrum there, right? So I think from a blockchain perspective is, what are some of the things that you can do to solve these practical paperwork applications? And I would challenge all of you in this room who are in the corporate world, there's lots and lots of administrative things that just happen because they've just always been done that way. And they're not sexy. I don't think it's important for technology, especially new and developing technology. It doesn't always have to solve sexy problems. Like I hear so many ideas around blockchain that says, we're going to have all of your medical records on blockchain. And maybe that's true someday. But today, that's probably really difficult in the context of how many people would have to be required to be in that world. So I think it's a transitional period where this is such a new technology, a new concept, that's just going to take time. And the more you can do simple solutions and you get confident around those, you can scale out from there.
Bernie Moreno, thank you so much for your perspective.
Right.
Thank you.